stands for freedom, equality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals, join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be with you, be back with you all. We're gonna have a great time discussing the news, joining our neighbors all around us as we unplug from the toxic groupthink media and reclaim our dignity, reclaim our birthright, which is our freedom. We don't have to ask government for freedom. Our freedom is part of our humanity, and it is something that we have to acknowledge, because if we don't, it will continue to divide people into groups based on collectivism. That is what we see in crowds. Crowds are where we get collectivism. And that's where politics devolves, when it abandons any kind of respect for the human person. Once you say human beings are expendable if your cause is worthy and just enough, it always devolves into bad tyrannical law, which eventually creates mirror tyrannical crowds who are angry and outraged but do not respect human personhood as well. And that's why we have to always challenge people to return back to the principles of personhood. That is, that your life is sacred, your liberty is sacred, the fruits of your labor, your property, all of these things are extensions of personhood. And that means that you have to respect your neighbor. When they say something you don't like, you don't get to hurt them. When they run their business in a way you think is greedy, you don't get to hurt them. When they have ideas that you find scary, doesn't mean you get to hurt them. If they are using medicine or things that you find to be scary or potentially problematic, you don't get to preemptively use violence against your neighbor as a way of kind of staving off what they could do in the future. That's just not how it works in a civilized society. But politics has been making us believe that somehow it's okay to do these things, to use preemptive violence against our neighbors, if only we get enough folks at the ballot box together to hand these fictitious powers to politicians who will then create immoral and bad behavior written as law. And that's just not something that we can, wash our hands of. We are responsible for the things that we delegate. You see what I mean? If you are not allowed to use violence against your neighbor as an individual, then you are responsible for using violence against your neighbor if you hand such coercive powers to politicians to enact punishments and so forth on your behalf. So if you can't create money out of thin air, you don't have the right to give government the power to print money out of thin air. If you cannot use violence to punish your neighbor for using the wrong medicine or something like that, then you don't have the right to do so by handing it to the state to do that. And the list goes on and on and on. But people say, oh, I don't have time for principles. All I have time for is power. Power, power, power. That's all people ever talk about, right? They act like they're there for I'm here to be kind. I'm here to be for the people. I'm here to be for justice. But what it really comes down to is power. People want power, and they are addicted to power. And they like to win by being a part of what they feel to be the most fashionable ideology that's going after power. And of course, the television is almost a monolith in its support of one type of view of power, namely that which is represented by the neoliberal corporate establishment, which is always about identity politics. It's always about nihilism. It's all about attacking the family, attacking any boundary of human desire. All of those things are based in a religious zeal to remake humanity into the image of whatever messianic state vision people have. Now, I'm not saying the average person who goes along with voting for these politicians and watching their television programs are all understanding on a conscious level the religious values that are being presented to them in these contexts. But nevertheless, that's the driving animus behind the monolithic groupthink that you see in corporate media. It is always a matter of folks kind of being drawn along by other people in elitist circles who want to kind of shape the world in a religious purpose, in a devotion to a kind of transcendent ideal. So what is that transcendent ideal? What is the transcendent ideal that so many folks in the top power echelons of our societies, what is their driving transcendent ideal? It is one in which power is the ultimate good. Power. I remember talking to social justice theorists, critical theorists at college and university and so forth. And they would always talk about everything's about power. Everything's about power. And we have to, change the discourse and change language so that we can get power. And I always said, well, what are you going to do once you get the power? If everything's about power, what do you do once you actually get the power that you say you don't have? Now, of course, they already did have power. That's why they were teaching a groupthink ideology like critical theory, which is what every six-figure university professor is teaching all across the country. So they're just imitating the power language of the university priestly caste. But I always ask them, well, what will you do once you get all the power you're supposed to get? Will you be socially just then, or will you punish and subdue your enemies such that they will have to spend all their time grabbing language and all kinds of things to get power back from you? And they never could give me an answer, because if your highest goal, your highest value, your highest transcendent is power, then it never ends. It is, in other words, if your highest goal is to consume, which is another form of looking at power, you're devouring something else. If that's your highest goal is consuming, then you will be consumed by that goal. It will consume you. And that's the same thing for holding power as the ultimate end-all, be-all, transcendent value. At some point, the pursuit of power, even if you dress it up with the highest language imaginable that justifies your righteous cause for using that power, it eventually becomes something that somebody else feels you have been unjust to them, and therefore they will want to have that same object of power as well. This is what all the stories are about. You look at Lord of the Rings and you see the stories that capture the imagination for people, and it's about the ring of power. And there's never this conclusion at the end of these movies where people say, well, yeah, you can wield that ring of ultimate power in a good, nice, convenient way. No, it's always concluded that the illusion of a just use of absolute power is an illusion, and it will always devolve into darkness and evil. But somehow it doesn't connect when it comes down to our ordinary, mundane world of politics. Somehow those values that stir our hearts when we watch these movies and these narratives in the older form where they would actually critique absolute power in movies and television shows and literature, somehow we lose sight of applying those lessons that really stir our heart in a fictional form. We have a hard time applying that to the real world. We always think, oh, no, that has nothing to do with me wanting my guy to be in power and to wield absolute power over the world with nuclear codes and tax policies and incarceration policies and wars without needing a declaration, all those things that are absolute power-based norms for our government. We just think, oh, that has nothing to do with the same kind of absolute power that is being repudiated in a story like Lord of the Rings, or even something more modern and nihilistic like Game of Thrones. ultimately it concludes by showing, not a spoiler, or not going to be too much of a spoiler, I hope, but it concludes in showing that even people who have, justice ideals, even people who want to be egalitarian and, equal in their distribution of power, that even those values, once they attain absolute power quickly, end up getting skirted. They end up getting thrown away. And the madness of power consumes even people with hopeful ideals. And yet somehow we watch these shows and these programs and these books, if people still read these books, and we don't understand how to apply that to our time. We think, that's a powerful movie, but I'm going to go ahead and vote for Bernie Sanders to control, control the economy with some kind of dictating type economy, or I'm going to give Trump, he's alone can fix it. He can fix the economy by not doing anything substantial to cut spending or audit the Fed or rein the reserve in. All these fictions that people buy into in their engagement in politics all are in contradiction to the feelings of truth that are stirred in them when they see those timeless stories that we all watch or read and are moved by that deep truth and wisdom that power is not an absolute good. And that power, if it is your ultimate good, will always consume everything in its sight and devour you as well. Why don't we learn that lesson in our time today? Why don't we step back and actually apply the values of these great movies and myths that we enjoy and actually apply it to our own ideology? That is the true test of wisdom. That is the true test of being an adult. We'll continue in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved two people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com. Hello, this is David Gornoski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
You can't have a fresh outlook on the new year if you're staring through a chipped or cracked windshield. Autoglass America will fix it and give you up to $150 cash back to help pay holiday bills. With qualifying insurance, we'll come to you with mobile service and install a premium quality replacement with a lifetime warranty at no cost to you. Get a great outlook on the new year with a new windshield and New Year's cash from Autoglass America. 813-96-GLASS. 813-96-GLASS.
A Neighbor's Choice is back. I'm David Gornoski, your host, and you look at all these stories underneath the the narratives of today, and it all goes back to what a blatant grab for power. They want to fit in. They want to be a part of the cool crowd. That's what folks in media are doing. They're writing stories to influence the narrative in a way that gives their clique power. So when you see stories where, I saw that, the media always keeps saying that Trump supporters attacked the Capitol. Imagine if they said that about all of the Antifa and BLM related riots that were attacking minority businesses and burning down cities and burning down buildings that are not considered sacred by the statists. Imagine if they had said Biden supporters burned down the city of such and such. Biden supporters burned down another building in Portland. Biden support, but they don't do that because that doesn't fit their ticket to power. As I've told you before, media outlets are PR firms for corporations and government bureaucracies that want narratives to be introduced into the public that makes them have more power. That's what human beings want. And as long as we persist in this Mickey Mouse fantasy that politics is anything but folks ruthlessly trying to grab power at all costs, then we will always be ill-equipped to understand the problems that we face. When I look at the discourse in this country, that's the one thing nobody wants to admit. Nobody wants to admit, well, my ideology really just wants power, and that's all we care about. And I'll lie, and I'll be inconsistent in my logic. I'll be inconsistent in my moral standards. I'll do anything for my team to have power over my rivals. And media is always stoking that. Can you think of media outlets that act as a mediation between warring tribes? How about peacemaking? Have you heard of any media outlet acting like a peacemaking side that says, hey, let's have a conversation together? Let's have a conversation together. You say this, you say that. And not just in a token, superficial way where it's just all, corny and cheesy, but really digging into the substance of things and having discussions about things and trying to find out where there's common area of agreement. At the end of the day, all of us, to varying degrees or another, are living under a system that is fundamentally broken for most of us. It's not broken for those who have access to industries and careers that are benefiting from Washington's corrupt redistribution of wealth for the politically connected. But it is very much a bad deal for the most of us who don't seem to really get, at the end of the day, a net benefit from Washington's involvement in our affairs. It's certainly a bad deal for folks who live in Libya who have to deal with DC's policies. It's certainly a bad deal for folks who live in the Ukraine. It's certainly a bad deal for the folks who are citizens living in Iran, who have to deal with blockades, starving their businesses. It's certainly a raw deal for folks who have to live in a country like Yemen, who face starvation campaigns started by Nobel Peace Prize winner Barack Hussein Obama. You see, it's a raw deal for folks who don't have access to the fuel that makes DC folks so excited, which is power. If you do not have access to power in DC, then what DC produces for you is very much a bad effect. DC doesn't concern itself with your well-being if you do not have power in that city. If you do not have power in that city, then your life is just not quite as valuable, is it? Is it really? Why is it that a business in inner city America can get burned down and people are sitting there saying this is a peaceful protest? Just a few people, that outside influencers. That's all that's all they would say. Just a few outside influencers. I remember that's all the left would say. And the neoliberal left is what I'm talking about. And they would say over and over again, every time another city was on fire and every time another person was killed, they'd say, oh, those are white supremacists. Those are white supremacists that are trying to make the movement look bad. Everybody in our group, they're just pure. This is religious irrationality. And the same thing happens on the right for folks that say, no, 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 no. Anybody who did anything bad in the Capitol Hill situation, those were all outside influences, and nobody who likes Trump would do anything stupid. That's a very irrational, insane, tribalistic thing to assume on both sides. But one side has 99% of the media, universities, and everybody pumping out their garbage lies day in and day out. And that's why the neoliberal left and their ridiculous religiosity is a much more dangerous groupthink problem to deal with. Because they have power and they're desperate to cling on to it. And so the stories that they tell their crowd who buy into their TV programming are much, much more potent because they have the post office, they have every agency, they have the NPR, they have universities, they have textbook curriculum, they have so much of the apparatus of reality defining information and discourse in our society. And they are pushing such extreme inflammatory approaches to dealing with people that they disagree with, such that it can have, and it is having, catastrophic consequences for everybody. All of this happens when personhood is discarded and power is picked up as the highest transcendent to bind each other together. When power is what is worshipped, you will produce awful results. Tomek on YouTube says, so is God corrupted? And he's in reference to Tina, who says, absolute power corrupts absolutely, by Lord Acton. Well, it's interesting when you mention God, because when God shows up into history, he shows up in a food trough, okay? So if God is trying to model the kind of power and grandiosity that human beings crave every time they get a chance at power, if that's what God's imitating, then why does he do the exact opposite about what human beings look for in power? He shows up in a food trough. He says that God will bless those who are just and unjust with rain. That's not the kind of power you're used to. You're used to power being Pelosi saying, these guys are all villains in Trump's protest, but my people who are protesting, they're all good, and the only people that do bad stuff are just outside groups. And people who are rational adults seemingly say, yes, that's correct. Everybody in my ideology, they're just perfect. It is stupid. We all know, we watch the movies, we watch the myths, we read the books, we know the timeless truth of humanity. The wisdom is that all power can corrupt. So when Jesus comes into reality, when Jesus comes into history, he comes in born in a barn in an animal food trough. He comes born in the lowliest places. That upends our expectation of what power looks like. That's why to this day, those who call themselves Christian are still saying Jesus plus Constantine, Jesus plus William Wallace, Jesus plus any kind of guru who will bring some of that power and that aggression and that assertion of domination back into the formula. They don't think that Jesus's package alone has any application in and of itself to our civic affairs, so they put Jesus plus whatever. George Washington, Ronald Reagan, right? Hillary Clinton, for those on the evangelical left, whatever. That's what you see whenever Jesus is presented, Tomek. Hope I'm saying your name right. Power is what human beings erect in their storytelling. And we know that to be the case. We know that that's the value that human beings put as the ultimate transcendent ideal to esteem to. So we can know that whoever Jesus is, he's not doing anything like what any other leader in history did. When he satirizes power, he comes on a donkey, he comes in a position on a food trough, satirically performing a witness to power and how ridiculous it really is. Back with more in just a moment.
There is all kinds of lunacy going on in the madness of 2020.
Weekdays 11 to 2.
I'm just so fed up with these Democrats. It's unbelievable.
Get it straight from Chris Plant.
They're so hypocritical. It makes me sick.
It's the Chris Plant Show.
This has just got me going off.
And the left is waging war against the police in the United States.
Telling it like it is.
You should be thanked profusely for getting to the point. You're a voice of reason in the sea of idiots.
The Chris Plant Show. Weekdays 11 to 2. News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Hundreds of arrests expected in the wake of violence last week by a mob of Trump supporters.
The FBI has opened more than 160 case files since the January 6th riot, and the FBI Steve D'Antuono said that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Agents from our local field offices will be knocking on your door if we find out that you were part of the criminal activity at the Capitol.
As for the charges,
we're looking at significant felony cases tied to sedition and conspiracy.
Acting U.S. Attorney Michael Sherwin said that's punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Aaron Katursky, ABC News, New York.
President Trump in Texas today touring sections of the border wall built during his term. In a speech, the president says he's not concerned about efforts to remove him from office. A vote is scheduled tonight calling for Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment, or the House will move to impeach the president. Health experts say anyone 65 and older nationwide can now sign up to get a COVID-19 vaccine as states work to expand vaccination sites. Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Neighbor's Choice is back. I'm David Gornoski. You can email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. Here's a story on reclaimthenet.org. World governments condemn tech-induced censorship of President Trump plan to regulate. A corporate decision should not limit free speech, officials say. Michael McCormick, the acting Australian Prime Minister, accused Twitter of censorship for suspending Trump's account permanently. He also compared the January 6 riots to the George Floyd riots that swept the world last year. In an interview on Monday, McCormick, who is standing in for Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who is on leave, suggested that Twitter should not have permanently suspended Trump's account. There's been a lot of people who have said and done a lot of things on Twitter previously that haven't received that sort of condemnation or indeed censorship. But I'm not one who believes in that sort of censorship, he said, speaking to ABC Radio National on Monday. At a press briefing later, McCormick doubled down on his criticism of Twitter. I say to the owners of Twitter that if you are going to take down the comments of the person who is still the American president, you need to think also about the photo, the doctored image, referring to the fake photo posted by a Chinese government official of an Australian soldier holding a knife to an Afghani kid's throat. The deputy prime minister also described the events that took place on Wednesday last week in the U.S. Capitol as unfortunate. It is unfortunate that we have seen the events at Capitol Hill that we've seen in recent days, similar to those race riots that we saw around the country last year. So he's doing a great heresy in comparing the mob actions in Capitol Hill to the race and Antifa riots, because those are sacred according to the corporate class, and the Capitol one is profane. And of course, human beings who are moral and decent, we know that all mob violence is profane and ugly. But people on the television, ABC, all these people, CBS, they're always going to try to get you to pick which team, if this one's a good team, the other team's villainous. Because that's what gives people power. That's how you pit people against each other. If we would just unite respecting our human personhood and our individual liberties from that, we could achieve so much. But instead, we're always divided based on these insane amounts of hatred and division that these corporate outlets that these corporate outlets foment. Germany and France both attacked big tech platforms that banned President Trump, continuing their war against big tech. German Chancellor Angela Merkel objected to the bans. The chancellor sees the complete closing down of the account of an elected president as problematic, her chief spokesman said in a news conference, adding that rights such as the freedom of speech can be interfered with but by law and within the framework defined by the legislature, not according to a corporate decision. The French government junior minister said was shocked. This should be decided by citizens, not by a CEO. He said on Bloomberg TV, there needs to be a public regulation of big online platforms. Finance minister called big tech giants the digital oligarchy and called big tech one of the threats to democracy. So that's good to see there's some pushback. But of course, what's the actual outcome of that pushback going to be? More entrenchment of these entities as, allies of government. They just want to make sure that they can control the delete button on Twitter and Facebook such that none of their preferred politicians will ever be inflicted on such bans and so forth. It's interesting to see that. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Because, we have to have these conversations. We cannot allow unelected government bureaucrats and social media cartels. It's not just social media, though. You saw how Apple and Google, they all work together. And to me, they wouldn't have that power if they weren't so cozy with those who have power in government. And so I don't see them as purely free market entities. When you have every coordinated effort from all these different industries, not just social media, but hosting and all these things, all coordinated against outlets that promote peace. Let me give you an example. Facebook banned Ron Paul. Why? They just did that yesterday, we found out. What are they afraid of? See, they always go after voices on any ideology that want to bring people together across the aisle. Tulsi Gabbard, Ron Paul, and, Donald Trump. And he kind of stoked division, but he at least criticized the war. He criticized some of the things. But they don't like people, first of all, who criticize the war machine. Tulsi Gabbard, Ron Paul, and Donald Trump have that in common to varying degrees. And second of all, they really don't like people who, again, scramble their narrative of the left versus right divide that's supposed to be the dominant story. They don't like peacemakers, in other words. And I think Tulsi Gabbard and Ron Paul are examples of people who don't play the same talking point, left versus right divide, and they unite people on values that are more common sense, that are not based on hatred. And that's a problem for people who make money off of stoking hatred. And that's sad. It's sad that we have people who want to sell out their fellow human beings just because it gives them what? A little modicum of power. Here's a story in revolver.news, which is an aggregator site, that says power over profit. Here's the dirty little secret behind the media's true business model. And it talks about, perhaps he's talking about the ratings Tucker Carlson's show continues to get. He said, wouldn't the fabled marketplace of ideas dictate a certain convergence towards the topics and styles that draw the biggest audiences? Perhaps the ad boycotts aimed at Tucker have scared off would-be copycats. But this simply raises the question of why companies would leave money on the table by refusing to advertise on television's most popular cable news show. Something is off here, and it suggests that the media industry does not work according to a simple profit motive. What if the true goal of a media conglomerate is not to produce a reliable and entertaining news service tailored to its audience, but rather to influence that audience on behalf of third parties? What if the purpose of a media company is not to be profitable for its own sake, but influential for the sake of others? Business models aren't always what they present themselves to be. Movie theaters make money not from ticket sales, but from concession stands. Airlines, likewise, need to sell tickets, but they make more profit from frequent flyer rewards programs. Supermarkets are increasingly big data collectors for insurance companies. Users of Google, YouTube, and other internet social media services might think of themselves as customers, but they are actually the product, as those services collect detailed data on users and sell it to third parties for advertising purposes. The Washington Post provides a clear example of a media company's true business model. Readers might recall that Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos purchased the Post for $250 million. The paper is, of course, notoriously biased against Trump, even by the standards of today's mainstream media. This may be good for business, and it may not be. But ultimately, this is not what matters. What matters is that the Post is directly or indirectly profitable to its owner, Jeff Bezos. If it lost money but influenced the public or other important constituencies in a manner that resulted in greater success for Amazon, a company 10,000 times its size, it would still be a worthwhile investment for Bezos. We can generalize this principle by noting that the parent subsidiary model is very common in business. Any given subsidiary does not have to be profitable in its own right so long as it benefits the parent company. In the case of the Washington Post, there is a clear parent company in the person of Jeff Bezos. But even absent the existence of a formal parent company, one can think of the American power structure itself as the true parent company of any sufficiently large and powerful media conglomerate. Although in some cases this is a metaphor, it captures a very important feature of how the media in our country function. For a media empire operating at the highest levels, the influence it wields on the public's mind is far more valuable to the ruling power structure than any self-contained profit that could be generated by optimizing their news product to suit the taste of the audience. This does not mean that profit is irrelevant to a media company. In Tucker's case, his stratospheric ratings are a great tool of leverage, and without profit, a company must continually court new investors. But the point remains that for a serious media enterprise, profit is always secondary to influence. Just as a social media company's true product is its user data, the true product of a major media company is the flow of narratives that shape the perception of reality. Wielding influence over the public will always be more valuable than any profit that could be generated by optimizing the news to suit public tastes. So that explains to you, and it's a very good description, some stuff there. It goes on to say Twitter was allowed to operate at such a massive loss because it has a profound influence on shaping narratives that in turn influence the population. Major media companies are not about profits, but influence. There is no marketplace of ideas that functions in the way people might imagine. And this applies to any industry that has a profound effect on the narratives and beliefs that shape the public perception of reality, including movies and video games. In our increasingly corrupt society, every institution is a scam, and there is often a vast disconnect between the generally understood purpose of an institution and its actual purpose. Entire belief systems are generated to obscure this disconnect, and this is where ideology comes into play. The nice-sounding ideology of free market fundamentalism serves to obfuscate the rapacious nature of oligarchs who operate beyond the bounds of any of the rules described in this naive economic worldview. Communism and socialism, similarly, are ideologies that serve only to obscure the ulterior interests of the very same oligarchs and the very same corrupt ruling class. Our observation about the media thus points to an interesting conclusion. The media's job is to use its profound influence to ensure that the masses interpret political and cultural events through the distortive lens of ideology. Ideology is a mediator that separates the true nature of an institutional scam from the public's perception of it. And the role of mainstream media is to maintain the dominance of ideology as the lens through which the public interprets reality. Media and ideology are similarly deceptive, and they both serve to perpetuate the illusions that enable our corrupt ruling class to lie, cheat, and steal with impunity. By piercing the illusion of what the media really is, we get closer to a clear view of the corrupt special interests that have enriched themselves at the expense of the American people. So, this is a perspective that has some good points to it, and it's something that I've talked about in different ways myself, which is that these outlets are PR firms for unelected government bureaucracies and giant corporations that make profit from certain government policies continuing. And so that's the situation that we have to deal with. And I want everybody to understand that. And it doesn't just stop at the outlets that are, are most hostile to your ideas. It's the ideologies that inform the outlets that are you're most excited about in general. That when you have these companies, they are there to sell. It's like a PR firm is not there, they're there to make another entity that's hired them look good. And the folks in DC have such a revolving door relationship with the corporations that often advertise at these companies that it's a pretty clear, direct line of influence that you see there. And that influence is what's driving a lot of the destructive ideas on both sides of the aisle as the dominant neoliberal narrative dominates most of the media. But then you have the mirror reactionary narrative that bubbles up as a response to being gaslit by that monolithic narrative. We'll take a quick break and return live on A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski. Stay tuned. David Gornoski here. Let me tell you about a man named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER. Hello, this is David Gornoski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality, grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender. So that was, we just read an article from revolver.news, parts of it, on how media functions as advocates for third parties rather than to be first and foremost considered about profitability. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so stuck on the same groupthink that happens to benefit those who are taking advantage of the hierarchy that our status system has. One of the things that's happening today is Trump just did a speech at the wall, at the border. And it's kind of surreal that a president of the United States is treated like they're some kind of,
alien entity when we had the entire media and Democrat establishment goading and goading and goading people to get very aggressive against Republicans for 4 years. But that doesn't mean that any collectivist ideology is good. But it is pretty insane to see that, to see the establishment, the neoliberal corporatists, try to basically wipe out the nascent Trump-aligned populist ideology. You have the Republican neocons and the establishment of the Republican Party aligned with the Democrats, and they are together trying to unite and expunge the populist movement that Trump started. Now, I'm not in any of these three camps, okay? But it's clear to me that the mask is falling off more and more and more for these folks who have tried to suggest that the establishments of these different parties are somehow, deeply, deeply caring about, doing right by people. They're not. They are nihilistically obsessed with their own self-interest. And they don't care if it tears everybody apart in the process of getting their special interests taken care of. So it'll be interesting to see where all this ends up going. It'll be interesting to see how our country moves on from this moment. Will we become an increasingly destroyed culture that is addicted to our heroin of political power, or will we let it go? It's tough to kick off an addiction, but it's something that's necessary. And that article I read, it criticized free market fundamentalism, and I understand kind of what they're talking about. But at the same time, we cannot be pretending that somehow more and more government centralized planning, but just in the right hands with pro-family values or pro-whatever, will somehow result in good and deep and lasting change. Because again, centrally planning and implementing something by force always backfires. It always does. Because we're not living in the old order anymore. We're living in the midst of birth pangs of a new world order. And those birth pangs were started some 2,000 years ago. And they are upending the logic of power wherever that story goes. And that story for 2,000 years has been sending people into a tailspin as long as they try to use the exertion of aggression and force to achieve their ideals. In other words, it's destroying the logic of power. Not by using the same power, but by allowing that power to collapse in on the weight of its own exertion. That's what it means when we talk about turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek is a social ordering principle that Jesus was explaining. Turn the other cheek was not something about just some little, sentimental thing that you do. It wasn't about just pacifism. It was something more deeper than that. It was a proactive way of dismantling evil by allowing evil to fall on its own weight, by not responding to evil, because evil feeds off of you getting into the mud with it. It feeds off of that energy. And that is the message that folks all around this country need to hear. If you think your rival ideology that you're trying to defeat is evil, don't reciprocate by grabbing for the same amount of power that they are. Because if you do, it'll only embolden your rival to grab it even more. We have to create a new contagion of positive role models that do not care about seizing power to subdue other people, but rather want to build nonviolent, peaceful solutions to the problems that persist in all of our lives. In the midst of all this political squabbling, we still don't even know the truth about human health and nutrition. We have so much misinformation in all these institutions of knowledge that there's so much that we should be doing right now to help our neighbors. I've talked a lot about seed oils as a foundation for understanding the rise in chronic illnesses in America. Processed flour, processed sugar, and seed oils. These are things we should be talking about. Because there's a lot of people who are suffering. You know, I saw a gentleman today who seemed to be suffering from some type of dementia or some type of, issue like that based on decline and old age. And it was really sad to see, because I saw he seemed so, polite, but at the same time you could see he was kind of getting lost in himself. And I saw his daughter, and there was just, she said, because I was talking, she said, thank you for talking to him. And, you could just see the pain in that woman's eyes that this is her dad, this is her Superman probably at some point when she was a child, and to see him in that state, able to move around and smile and be everything, but just lost in his own mind. And to think these are diseases that could be prevented if we had not been so stupid to buy into what? Statist, politicized medicine and nutrition information. If we hadn't allowed people who were based on pseudoscience like Ansel Keys to hijack so much of our political nutrition understanding. If we had just gotten government out of nutrition and gotten government out of our understanding of human health, we would have way more diversity of thought, and we would have been able to weed out the bad ideas and move our attention towards the ideas that actually produce results, not Ansel Keys failing to provide information that was correct, and then government institutions getting on board with that, and giant corporations getting on board with that and monopolizing information. Alzheimer's and these dementia disorders are not supposed to be commonplace. They weren't prior to the introduction of seed oils and processed flour and processed sugar. Think about the pain and suffering that is built into so much of our fabric of our life because of people seeing their loved ones suffer from debilitating diseases like diabetes and heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, childhood cancers, all these terrible things that put all this suffering baked in, and this misery and this brokenness. And if we're supposed to be bringing life to the world, then we need to address those things. And we can't so long as we're stuck and distracted by people's desperate attempts of accumulating more power. Because I believe the answers to solving these chronic illnesses, these diseases of modern civilization that have only been happening in the skyrocketing rates in the last 100 years or so, that we can stop these things dead in their tracks, but we have to have the courage to think outside of the box of what government nutrition and their corporate crony allies have been proposing. And if we change our attitudes about science and actually go where the facts go and actually go where the truth goes, then there's a constructive way that without having to do a single legislative act or a single political campaign, we can transform millions and millions and millions of people's lives all around us by just telling the truth about the way the human body works and what its proper fuel is and how it should be treated. Do you see how much more beautiful it is to think about the world when we're not obsessed with power? I'm David Gornoski. We'll be back in just a moment for hour 2, but for now, Godspeed.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park, Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way that news.
From ABC News, I'm Michelle Franzen. With just days left before President Trump's term ends, the clock is also ticking on efforts and calls to remove him from office. Tonight, a House committee will vote on a resolution calling for Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. House Democrats say if Pence does not, they will impeach the president for insurrection.
House Democrats asking Republicans how they condone a president telling supporters to march on the U.S. Capitol to overturn an election.
Can you imagine any other president in our history encouraging and fomenting mob violence against the Congress of the United States?
Congressman Jamie Raskin joining other Democrats demanding Vice President Pence remove President Trump using the 25th Amendment. Andy Field, ABC News, Washington.
Representative John Katko of New York becoming the first House Republican to say that he will vote for impeachment. President Trump today in Texas to visit the border wall, earlier denouncing the violence, but telling reporters and also in his speech he's not responsible for rallying supporters.
We believe in the rule of law, not in violence or rioting.
Meantime, the FBI says they're tracking thousands of leads. Today, Michael Sherwin, the acting U.S. attorney in D.C., says there is a strike force to hold everyone accountable.
Regardless of if it was just a trespass in the Capitol or if someone planted a pipe bomb, you will be charged and you will be found.
Coronavirus cases continuing to surge around the country. Health leaders and states ramping up vaccinations.
Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar says the U.S. will no longer hold back doses of vaccines.
We are releasing the entire supply we have for order by states rather than holding second doses in physical reserve.
Previously, only half the doses available initially went out, while the other half was held back to ensure there would be supply for the second dose.
ABC's Mark Remillard reporting. You're listening to ABC News.
They're knocking on the door. They're calling your phone. It's your bad credit. It's chasing you, and it won't leave you alone. You need real help. The FTC says credit repair is a fraud. They say no one can take any money in fees up front and all they do is lie. Now what? Raise Credit has helped thousands of consumers for over 40 years. Credit building is the only way you can get your credit score to a 750 and higher. If you need or want a 750 credit score, Raise Credit is the only way. Stop bringing the pain home. If you need personal or business credit, Raise Credit will build it for you. Call 800-490-4140. That's 800-490-4140. Raise Credit has daily webinars helping people just like you rebuild their credit legally and quickly. Fulfill your dreams in 2020. Raise Credit will set up a new $1,000 cash credit card for you at the end of the program. Just a setup fee and a call will get you the 750 credit score you've been waiting for. Call 800-490-4140. That's 800-490-4140.
While most TV and film productions in LA have shut down because of COVID, one show is back on set.
The Conners, back on set today in Los Angeles, starring executive producer Sarah Gilbert, tells me after talking to experts, they feel they have the right protocols in place.
A lot of testing to see where our cast and crew is at. We wear bracelets to monitor how close people get to each other.
Most productions still on hiatus as coronavirus cases surge in LA, and she says they'll shut down again if they have to.
Everybody's sort of struggling to make these decisions. It's definitely not easy, and it's something that we take very seriously.
Jason Nathanson, ABC News.
An automaker taking off with a new venture.
Chrysler has entered an agreement with California-based Archer to produce an all-electric car that flies. The vertical takeoff and landing aircraft is designed to carry passengers at 150 miles per hour with almost no sound at all. Some analysts expect the autonomous urban aircraft market to be $1 trillion industry by 2040. Jim Ryan, ABC News.
South Korean officials say that they've withdrawn recently published guidelines for pregnant women following some backlash. Those guidelines included encouraging women to tie up hair so they don't look, quote, disheveled, and keeping a small-sized dress in sight as motivation to lose weight. This comes as the government tries to persuade women to have more babies and reverse the world's lowest birth rate. This is ABC News.
Ready to create your own income with your own home-based business where there's no such thing as getting laid off? If a billionaire entrepreneur spent 5 years and $20 million searching for the next big trend, wouldn't you want to know what he found? If you're serious about making money from home without having to leave home, then write this down. www.goherenext.com. You decide your income. Get the facts now. GoHereNext.com.
Michelle Franzen, ABC News.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
A neighbor's choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski, and we're glad to be back with you live FM AM at neighborschoice.com, where you can listen to the audio stream live on neighborschoice.com every day that we broadcast. We have a new online-only podcast with geneticist and chef Brad Marshall, which you can view on neighborschoice.com right now, that talks about PUFAs, which are polyunsaturated fatty acids, versus saturated fat, and how that influences your metabolic health, mitochondrial health, and other aspects of our present situation that we're just starting to get information out. So that we're glad that we have a free internet to some degree, as regulated as it continues to be by little cartel behaviors and things that seem to be benefiting giant corporations and giant governments. We have the ability still within our grasp to disseminate revolutionary new paradigm shifts and information that are guided by studies, guided by science, but just not pushed because they don't benefit anybody. If you don't have a patented drug, people don't want to hear about revolutionary alternatives to how to deal with illnesses and disease. They don't want to hear it. They just don't want to hear it. And that's the thing that just irritates me so much, is these people that have the audacity to say, oh no, we are for the science. We're just rational, deeply scientific about medicine or health, but everything they do always results in, well, you need a new patented drug. Nothing is able to be explored that says, hey, actually just remove these items, add this item, do this different thing, and your lifestyle doesn't cost a patented drug. You don't have to pay anything like that. It doesn't cost really anything. Just living your life in a different way, and you can get rid of those diseases without having to be on some side effect riddled drug. You're never allowed to hear that. Only thing you hear about diet and nutrition is noise. All these dubious studies that are survey based, that are not any solid evidence for what they're talking about. Oh, studies say people who eat red meat are having diseases. Yeah, because they don't also screen for the fact that people who eat red meat tend to be those who, rebel against other things that are considered to be healthy, advice. And that means they often are more likely to eat potatoes and junk food and sedentary lifestyles and smoke and so forth. That doesn't mean that it's the red meat that's causing the correlation to the disease, but they don't tell you that. They just put all these confusing noise stories out. Oh, mushrooms would destroy you. Oh, this would destroy you. Oh, that will destroy you. And it's always about this hysteria. And it's always about pushing people towards big plant and patented foods, copyrighted food, trademark foods, processed foods that have a lot of profit margins on them. And then also those eating that processed food ends up making you need patented new drugs. So it's a real convenient little gimmick. And every time we call them out, they say, oh, no, we just got to get rid of the free market. We just got to get rid of the free market. Okay. So that'll solve the problem. You have a parasitical government intervention in our economy and medicine and health and studies, which is distorting information. And you're saying that the truth is we just got to clamp down on the last remaining aspects of freedom in that space. It's ridiculous. But people who buy into television, people who buy into low information narratives, they go along with this stuff. People were told to switch away from animal fats to vegetable oils, and they had massive diseases increase. Massive diseases increase. Another story that's interesting, casino mogul and GOP mega donor Sheldon Adelson dies at 87. He was a big influence in the Republican Party. He was a multi-billionaire casino mogul. The story is in CNBC.com. Republican mega donor. He died from complications related to cancer treatment. His net worth was estimated by Forbes to be around $33 billion. He was a staunch supporter of Israel, and he was a big influence on the Republican Party. It'll be interesting to see where that influence continues after him, how that continues to shape, the policies and so forth of that party. And in other news related to the Republican Party and its future, the New York Times reports that McConnell is said to be pleased about impeachment, believing it will be easier to purge Trump from the GOP. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, has told associates that he believes President Trump committed impeachable offenses and that he is pleased that Democrats are moving to impeach him, believing that it will make it easier to purge him from the party, according to people familiar with his thinking. The House is voting on Wednesday to formally charge Mr. Trump with inciting violence against the country. Now, what the New York Times won't say is that Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters and Kamala Harris and all the other, Hillary Clinton, were all stoking people to get in people's faces throughout this year and years past, getting up. And remember, they said even the former Attorney General, Eric Holder, said, Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high. He says, no, when they go low, we go after them. We get nasty. So that's what we'll continue to see, that kind of mentality excused, because Mitch McConnell doesn't care about taking on the Democrat establishment. He doesn't like anything that upsets their little game. They're playing a game. And they're making money together, and they don't want anything to upset that little status quo. But he's so out of touch. If he thinks that going along with purging Donald Trump is somehow going to make 75 million people who voted for him just, oh, yeah, okay, we'll go back to Mitt Romney's and McCain's and all that. They got another thing coming. That's not how again, that's because they don't understand that when Jesus talks about the turning of the cheek principle, that applies even to issues like this. When you try to stamp out something by force, by trying to excise Trump and the persona and the ideas that are wrapped around his movement, if you just try to purge it out by force, it will make people become even more entrenched in their loyalty to the movement around that. And it's not going to make it go away. So Mitch McConnell is living in a fantasy land if he thinks that somehow it's going to go back to the days of Bush and Romney and McCain and Bob Dole, that kind of, establishment friendly narrative. That's perpetual war, fake trade deals, and so forth. Representative Kevin McCarthy of California, the minority leader of the House, New York Times says, has asked other Republicans, whether he should call on Mr. Trump to resign in the aftermath of the riot at the Capitol last week, according to 3 Republican officials briefed on the conversations. McCarthy said he's personally opposed to impeachment. He and other party leaders have decided not to formally lobby Republicans to vote no. And an aide to Mr. McCarthy said he was open to a measure censuring Mr. Trump for his conduct. In private, Mr. McCarthy reached out to a leading House Democrat to see if the chamber would be willing to pursue a censure vote, though Speaker Nancy Pelosi has ruled it out. Wouldn't it be amazing if these people were censoring people for going into a bloody war like Libya or Syria or Yemen, or stoking bloody, chaotic regime change chaos in Egypt Tunisia and other countries, Iran, Syria. Wouldn't that be great if we could wake up in another world and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy were actually doing the right thing and say, hey, we're going to censure this president or that politician for inciting chaotic insurrection, war, and bloody coups around the world. But no, these people live in bizarro land. These people live in a distorted reality. They live in cowardice because they don't actually want to stand up for life in all cases, not just when it's politically convenient. They want to stand up only for things that protect their interests. And they don't want Donald Trump's narrative or his brand to take over their party. But they don't understand, they're ignorant, that the more they try to subdue it with force, the more it's going to become more and more powerful. This is the way of the world. It creates a martyr's complex. Even if you disagree with an ideology, it's not about whether you like that ideology or not. If you don't like an ideology, you don't want to subdue it by force because it'll only make it have more of a martyr's energy within those who see what's happening and say, hey, that's unfair. You're trying to squash something that had good values. After all, some people might say that Trump's movement was more moral and less violent than the ideology of the Republican Party that it's at war with. Because it is the reigning Republican ideology of Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan that has created thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of unnecessary deaths all over the globe. And it's been the reigning ideology of Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan that has incarcerated thousands and thousands and thousands of nonviolent first-time offenders and destroyed many, many children's lives because their parents, their moms, and their dads were not around for some petty minor offense that people like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan just crushed their family over. So and Trump didn't do a lot on that, but at least he did the First Step Act, which Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan would have never touched in a million years if they had their way. And so you can make a very good case that Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell's version of the Republican Party is a much more ruthless and violence promoting ideology than the one that Trump promoted. And again, that doesn't make me on team either team. It makes me calling it straight like it is. We'll take a quick break and be back in just a moment, live on A Neighbor's Choice. Email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. Visit our website, aneighborschoice.com. We'll be back after this short break.
Hello, this is David Gornoski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Do you despise lawyers? That may be the case until you need one. If you've been in an auto accident and need legal advice, go to the local attorneys that have served Tampa Bay families for over 28 years. Catania and Catania. They are family owned. They understand your legal situation. When you need legal representation, Catania and Catania will care for your case from the beginning to the end of representation. You won't need to worry. Catania and Catania will represent you through the entire process. Auto or motorcycle accidents are too frequent in Florida. Catania and Catania. They don't get paid if you don't get paid. Referrals on request. Contact Catania and Catania. Putting families first. Offices, Tampa. An attorney spokesperson.
A Neighbor's Choice returns. So really what we're dealing with when we deal with these ideologies is we're dealing with religions. We're dealing with cult-like behavior. And there's been a lot of documentaries and movies and studies on how people fall into cults and how it's very difficult for family members to get their family out of cults that they see them falling into. Very difficult. It always starts with, certain kind of personality cults or persona cults and charisma, and it comes up with little bits of truth here and there. And that's what we see with the Trump derangement cult. That's what we see with the Trump worshiping cult. That's what we see with the social justice ideology cult. That's what we see with the neocons, American warmongering policeman cult. We get all these different little ideologies. And they're always, the more entrenched people lose their reality into these things, they become hallucinatory and they start doing terrible things and calling for terrible things. And all of it needs to be challenged. All of it needs to be, we need to be on guard against. But one thing we have to remember is all of these things are in keeping with deprogramming and returning to personhood as our way of processing the world. That means taking responsibility for the things that we say and not delegating responsibility to politicians to do things on our behalf that we know would be wrong for us to do individually. Here's a story that's interesting to follow. It says, Gab CEO has massive surprise for anti-Trumpers. This is on populist.press. Gab.com says, for months we have been backing up every reply to Donald Trump's tweets. We call this project the Liberal Hate Machine. It conducts sentiment analysis to detect threats of violence, slurs, and more. There's a lot. It's searchable too. Stay tuned. And then they say, we have over 100 million tweets collected of the very hateful people on this website, making the most disgusting and highly illegal replies to the president and other conservatives. And then Twitter disabled comments on this post below with no reason given, because Gab says we are getting resumes from senior level employees at big tech companies, hearing that many people are putting in their 2 weeks to internal civil war among staff and executives, panic in Silicon Valley, the house of cards falls, the exodus has begun. So, again, the media, they get so caught up in their hallucinatory cult that they say, if you are not on a site that's approved by your television and the warmongers and the banker bailout folks and the statists who worship political correctness ideology and vote for mass incarcerating folks like Joe Biden, if you're not on those platforms that we approve of, big pharma, big bank approved, like Twitter or Facebook, if you're on Gab or if you're on any of those other platforms, you are evil, extreme, untouchable. That's not going to work. They're failing. They are losing. I'm trying to explain this, and it's hard to do in a live broadcast with such limited time, but I tried to do this throughout our time together to plant seeds of how to see this. But the way Jesus has broken into the way the world used to do things, that every time these powerful structures try to stamp out things and say, oh, if you're on Gab or any other site, that means you're just bad. You're just bad. You can't be for... So Ron Paul gets deleted off Facebook, and this man did more to help minority communities than any of the jokes that the Democrats push as justice advocates, right? This is a man who fought for people of color all over the globe by stopping and trying to stop the wars of aggression. This is someone who has fought for privacy, for ending mass surveillance, for protecting freedom of speech for all folks. And in other words, this is someone who is very much passionate about a Christian respect for the human person. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything he says, but his foundational principles are in keeping with the flourishing of the personhood framework that protects people from mob violence and tyranny. And so Facebook bans someone like that. So if he goes on Parler or Gab or these other sites that the television tells you must blindly hate everybody, you're supposed to go along with that narrative. It's a joke. And it's so pathetic that they're going to continue to turn people who would normally be okay with their television garbage narratives, they're going to spew those narratives out and say, I'm done with these people. I'm tired of these bullies. These people are bullies at best. Society is always going to have a soft spot for what they perceive to be a scapegoat or an underdog. And the more that these bullies who have all the institutional frameworks in their hands keep pushing, the more they're going to lose all the moderates and the independents, and they already are losing them by millions. And that's what's going on right now. So this is an exciting time. This is an exciting time to be in media. I am so glad I didn't waste my time tweeting away at Twitter to see these people who've got millions of followers get deleted like that. What an insult. But we have to build media communication distribution mechanisms that will allow us to bring this more mature, more sophisticated, more intelligent, more educated approach at discourse. And it starts with the respect of the human person. The human life is sacred. It's sacred when it's unborn. It's sacred when they're near the end of their life. It's sacred when it's someone overseas. It's sacred when it's someone the media tells you is deplorable. It's always sacred. No victim, no crime. These are principles that are rooted in a respect for the human person that we continue to advocate on this platform. And the folks that continue to try to demoralize and attack and denigrate anybody who doesn't think like them, they will continue to find that their power slips away more and more because they don't write the rules of reality. Jesus created a story in history that is transforming the imaginations of human beings, whoever around the world is steeped in such a story. It doesn't happen overnight. That's why people, after they encounter the story of Jesus, still mistook what he was saying. Even the followers of Jesus who hung out with him and had breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 years with him in his own ministry, even they admitted that they didn't understand what he was doing. They still wanted Jesus to be the politician that you and people around you and me are tempted to want to follow today. Someone who grabs for power to defend those who need to be defended. Even Peter misunderstood what Jesus was doing. And to the point, it's so confusing for people. They so don't want to admit what Jesus is saying to this day, that people say, well, Jesus was only being a meek and mild person. They try to denigrate his message, by the way, with those kind of language. But they try to say, oh, Jesus was only being the suffering servant for a time. But now he's back to being basically the same as every other pagan god. Vengeful, power hungry, domineering, going to smite everybody down. That's what all the pagan gods were like that. What a disrespect to the personhood revolution that Jesus inaugurated, the true man of history. What a disrespect, and an ignorant disrespect at that. Trying to make Jesus into the fashion of their own idols, their own political aspirational idols made in their own lust for power. But that's not what's happening. And so it is the case that the more that ideologies try to subdue their opponents by force, the more it will create a counter explosion of more support. But through all this, we must always adhere to nonviolence, non-aggression, non-vengeance. That's the essence of human civilization. That's the essence of progress. It doesn't mean you can't defend yourself if someone's trying to attack you, but that you cannot turn that into some kind of justification for political violence in any shape or form. And you can't do it at the ballot box too, which unfortunately is where a lot of this stuff is has been started. Take a quick news break. Back in just a moment on A Neighbor's Choice.
Ronald Reagan would turn over in his grave if he saw what's going on today.
Crazy things are happening.
You cannot be afraid. You've got to stand up for what you believe is right.
One thing is for sure.
You can't trust anybody.
For talk, news, and information, you can count on us.
Enough is enough. I mean, I almost blew a gasket.
Good for the country.
I know what I'm talking about. A lot of wackos out there.
Your connection to talk about it. The all-new News Talk 1040 WHB.
The House is preparing to take the first of two historic votes, which could remove President Trump from office before his term ends next Wednesday. Tonight, it's a resolution calling on Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment in response to last week's attack on the U.S. Capitol. And if Pence doesn't, the House will move forward with an impeachment for Mr. Trump, an unprecedented second time. A warning to the rioters from federal law enforcement.
Regardless of if it was just a trespass in the Capitol or if someone planted a pipe bomb, you will be charged and you will be found.
Michael Sherwin, the acting U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. President Trump talking up his border wall in a visit to Alamo, Texas.
It's steel, it's concrete inside the steel, and then it's rebar. A lot of heavy rebar inside the concrete.
And the president says 450 miles of wall have been built on his watch. Actually, it's just 47 miles of new wall. The CDC says all air travelers to the United States must now test negative for COVID-19. Daria Albinger, ABC News.
Our Neighbor's Choice is back. I'm David Gornoski. We're looking at the news today. I see a story here that kind of following up with my last story about Gab collecting all these hateful comments that the media wants to brush aside and act like they'd never happened. Hateful, violent comments. I mean, I remember what they've been saying about Senator Rand Paul. Every time Senator Rand Paul says anything, if he says anything against war, if he says anything like in favor of his Breonna Taylor Act, these nasty, hateful bigots that the television continues to stoke, and they use the same language on every late night show. They use the same language on every morning show. They use the same language on every television network, every social media little blue check thing. They use the same language over and over again to dehumanize anybody who is not on board with a mass bomber like Joe Biden and a mass incarcerator like Kamala Harris. The television approved fake justice warrior ideology. They continue to try to demonize anybody who's not onto that horrible, wicked, corporatist agenda. And it's just going to continue to backfire. But the problem is, in the midst of that, there's a lot of violent and aggression that can happen on both sides. And those who are adults, we have to be the peacemakers that try to bring sanity back into the conversation. And that's the last thing that a lot of these folks who stoke this division want. They don't want sanity. They want religious devotion to garbage ideologies that do nothing but enrich the powerful and hurt people. But this story in Breitbart News says free speech platform Gab reports 600,000 new users in one day. And so that shows that people are moving with their feet. They're tired of being beholden to arrogant, self-righteous, hypocritical platforms that say, that say one thing and do another. They say they're for justice, but if you disagree with Joe Biden's policies, they delete your memes like they do on Instagram when you talk about his work on the the crime bill of 94. Or when they say they're for peace, and yet what do? They stop Ron Paul from denouncing wars like he does by blocking him on Facebook. These people are bigots, and everybody sees through it. Real progressives see through it. Real independents see through it. Real moderates see through it. Real centrists see through it. Real conservatives see through it. Libertarians see through it. All constitutionalists, all the different folks, they see through it. And so we just have to not be afraid of standing up for the truth. But we cannot also give in to the false song of coercion like they always stoke in the corporate press, because it will only result in bad ideology and bad crowd explosions. Coercion is never the way to go. German bank giant cuts ties with Trump. Another story says on Breitbart, payment processor Stripe blacklists Trump campaign. They just continue to stoke more and more aggression. So what do you do with it? You cannot stoop to that level. You cannot jump into the mud. It will only make everything worse. At the same time, you cannot be a coward and not, tell the truth. Tell the truth about nutrition. Tell the truth about science. Tell the truth about principles of right and wrong. Tell the truth about the family. Tell the truth about being pro-life. Tell the truth about war. Tell the truth about foreign aid. Tell the truth about fake trade deals. Tell the truth about the failed war on drugs. Tell the truth about the failed war on education that the government schooling has continued to foster. Just tell the truth. Tell it with conviction. Tell it with courage. Tell it with confidence. And tell it with humility at the same time. That's the paradox of adulthood. You can be both humble and confident at the same time. Because I don't see any of that on display in the establishment press. I don't see any humility. I don't see any confidence. Those things are not diametrically opposed. What they have to offer is just, desperation, self-righteousness, narcissism, lies. They don't offer anything that heals. So we have to turn off the television, turn off the garbage programming that they have to offer, and learn to trust in things closer to home. Learn to trust in our communities again. I saw that the United States government announced that they're going to require everybody flying into America to show a negative test for COVID before they can fly. They want to micromanage everybody like they're, cattle. But that's not the way of the future. The way of the future will be those who show meekness and humility. And you have to have faith that that is true, that it's not just a sentiment. But nobody has faith in that. Nobody has faith in the power of Jesus' message to bring down evil, not by responding to it with the same evil or force, not by responding to it with a mirror force, but by allowing these things in their exertion and in their arrogance to fall apart under their own weight of exertion. This is the social aikido of Jesus' personhood revolution. You don't respond to wickedness and evil with force and coercion. If you do that, that just gives them an excuse to get worse and worse, and then it creates ignorance, and it creates pain and suffering, and it creates justification for more tyranny. That's what Barabbas, the guy who they let free, the crowd let him free and decided to kill Jesus, he was offering force in response to the tyranny of the Roman Empire. And think about what that is. The Roman Empire was a lot nastier and gruesome in the way they dealt with getting people to submit than the bad behavior of the American government, right? The Roman Empire would, crucify people in the public square. They were brutal, vicious. They would assault people, horrible. And Barabbas saw that, and he wanted to take it by force. Much like Peter, when he said to Jesus, don't ever to say you're going to be killed by the cross. We're not going to let that happen. Because he had in his mind that Peter would do something similar to what Barabbas was doing, that he would take power by force and to correct all the wickedness. And every time you say, well, I'm going to keep voting for big government and big business benefiting corporatism and big government expansion in our lives, nanny state control over business and war on drugs and war on education and all this stuff. Whenever you keep voting for that, you're basically saying, I'm going to go with Peter and Barabbas on this. I want force. I don't want the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is not attractive to us. By nature, we want what Peter says. He says, don't tell me you're going to let yourself get killed on the cross. And again, we want the Peter way so much that we have convinced ourselves, even in Christian circles, that Jesus was only nonviolent in that moment. That was a special little mission. And then afterwards, he's just going to be vindictive and petty and power hungry like Peter and Barabbas were acting as well. And like every other world leader that we've ever desired to emulate and prop up. All the presidents that get the biggest glory in the history books of American government education are the ones who start the most wars and start the most power grabs and suspend liberties and habeas corpus and all the other things. We don't want what Jesus offers, just like Peter didn't want it. He said, let it not be said that you're going to do that. And Barabbas was the one that the crowd cheered for. He wanted a revolution. He saw the rapes that the Roman government was doing. He saw the assaults. He saw the theft of their wealth and property. He saw the belittling, the humiliation, the disrespect, the vulgarity, the nihilism on display. And he thought that he could make Israel great again. He thought he could do it by force, just like Peter thought he could do it by force. And that's why the crowd wanted Barabbas to be saved. And that's why Peter, when push came to shove, did not stand up for his master when he realized that the crowd had really turned against his hero. And we turn against Jesus every time that we say, well, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I'm going to vote for this tough on crime, government intervention, or I'm going to vote for this politician, Mitch McConnell, and these Paul Ryan and all this stuff, and even Trump's policies. These are all things that are against the beautiful message that is truly in charge of reality today, which is that power is made perfect in weakness. And Jesus showed that. And it's still a mystery to us. We're still like, I can't hear that. And so we create these theologies and these theories to try to take that mystery of Jesus's radical, beautiful power made perfect in weakness revolution. And we try to quarantine it, we try to bottle it up, and we try to philosophize it or theologize it away. But it's still haunting us. It's still bothering us. It's still pricking our conscience. And we try and we try and we try to come up with an ideology that can satisfy that which the truth of the cross continues to prick at our conscience. Even those of us who are not religious are pricked by it. That's why they go and lay in the streets and say, I can't breathe, in a religious ritual to try to become one with George Floyd in his death. And they say they're atheists, they say they're secular, they're not. They're thoroughly hungry for unity. They're thoroughly hungry with some kind of solution to assuage the guilt that they feel eaten up inside about. And Jesus offers a way of living without guilt, without being consumed by self-condemnation. He offers a way of nonviolence, but nobody wants to take it because they don't believe it's true. Even those who say they sing his name every day, they sing his name and it doesn't mean anything. It's like chanting Hercules, Hercules, Hercules. They're just chanting a name that just makes them feel like they're part of a team that is insider versus outsider. But do they actually live the way he lived? When someone comes up to them like Peter did to Jesus and says, hey, don't say you're going to do the nonviolent thing. Take some force. Show some power. That's why Trump's ideology failed. Because he said, you got to be tough. You got to show power. You got to show power. Because he thought that could beat the evil that he saw from the elites. And they beat him at that game. That's what Peter wanted. Peter was telling Jesus, hey, you got to show power. You can't let yourself get killed on the cross. And Barabbas was saying, hey, you got to show power. That's why I'm taking on the Roman soldiers. That's why I'm stoking an insurrection. Can't do this by nonviolence. And that's why the crowd chose Barabbas. That's why Peter went with the crowd. And that's why to this day, Most people who call themselves even Christians don't want to even begin to imitate Jesus's beautiful, simple message of nonviolence because they don't think it will work. Because secretly they think they're God. And that if they were God, they would do things by force. They wouldn't do things by the cross. And that's why people persist in the delusion that we can have big government and centralized planning and coercion with Christian values and somehow it'll work. And those on the left who say, well, we're going to do our social justice ideology, free college that will be done by force, free healthcare, which will be done by force, free, liberation of all the peoples of the world that'll be done by force, free this, free that, all this heaven on earth stuff. When it's always, you peel the layer of the marketing off of it and you just see coercion. You just see people like Peter, like Barabbas, telling people that the only way you can solve problems and have justice be done is by subduing and dominating your opponent. That is the lie of politics, and Jesus defeated it. He broke it apart, and we don't want to realize it, but here's the thing. This is my point. We don't realize it at our own peril, because now that infecting idea of Jesus's life is into our universe, people who try to keep running things by force, it will continue to devolve into chaos. It'll be worse than it was eventually. It'll be worse than what it was in the time of Jesus. Attempts at using force to create meaning and order and justice. I'm David Gornoski. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. Back in just a second. Hello, this is David Gornoski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality, grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Some out-of-the-area law firms advertise that they are the largest. Do you think large firms help your case? Possibly, but your case will receive personal care from local attorneys Catania and Catania. They are family-owned, Tampa Bay attorneys representing clients who have experienced auto and motorcycle accidents. Your case with Catania and Catania will seek to get a settlement in your favor expeditiously. Catania and Catania, serving Tampa Bay families for over 28 years. Referrals on request. Get the local law firm that will care for your case from beginning to end. They don't get paid if you don't get paid. Catania and Catania, putting families first. Car accident, motorcycle accident, call the local attorneys. Catania and Catania. Offices Tampa. Not attorney spokesperson.
Hi, this is Gary from Good Faith Home Buyers, and I buy houses cash. If you own your house and want to sell it fast, call me at 727-330-6224. That's 727-330-6224. I can pay cash and close fast. I buy houses in any condition, any price range, and any location. I'm not a realtor or associated with any realty company. I'm a private real estate investor who buys several houses a month and wants to buy more. I'll buy inherited houses, divorce houses, behind in payment houses. I'll even buy my tenant won't pay me the rent houses. Do you own a house that is trash and needs thousands of dollars in repairs? Great, because I love buying junky houses. I buy vacant houses, abandoned houses, condemned houses, and foreclosure houses. If you own a house and want to sell it fast, call me at 727-330-6224. That's 727-330-6224.
Hello, David Gornoski here. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. our website on neighborschoice.com. Looking at the news, look at this story here. It just shows you the craziness that I just have to report on, the madness of the craziness that we see. In Newsweek.com headline, Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley could be put on no-fly list, House Homeland Security Chair says. Representative Benny Thompson has said Senators Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley could be put on the no-fly list if they're found liable for inciting the riot at the Capitol that left 5 people dead. Thompson, a Democrat representing Mississippi's 2nd Congressional District, told SiriusXM's The Joe Madison Show on Monday that there would be no exception for elected officials who were found responsible for the deadly incident. There's no question about placing the Capitol rioters on the domestic no-fly list, though there is some debate as how quickly this could be done. So they're going to put people on no-fly lists that, like Senator Ted Cruz, supposed to be treated like a terrorist now. You see how cynical and pathetic their little style is? We had Democrats object to the election of Republican presidents in the past. But they cynically want to say that if Ted Cruz objected to the election, the certification of the Electoral College, that therefore that means he is directly endorsing what happened afterwards where violence spilled out. That's pathetic, cynical, status quo, nothing to see here, same old DC nonsense. That doesn't mean that the rhetoric is good or bad or whatever. What it means is they tried to attach what they did in contesting past elections, and they attach that to what Cruz did, and then they try to attach Cruz to, well, they don't attach what they've done in the past like Cruz did when he objected, but they try to say, in Cruz's case, it's worthy of being treated like a terrorist on a no-fly zone, no-fly list. Joe Biden vows thorough investigation into Trump officials for border policy. This is on Breitbart.com. During a press conference, Biden committed to having the Justice Department open an investigation into Trump officials who carried out the zero-tolerance policy through which adult border crossers entered separate custody from the children they arrived at the southern border with. The practice, as Breitbart News noted, has been employed since before 2001, though the Trump administration ended the effort in 2018. I'll commit that our Justice Department, our investigative arms, will make judgments about who was responsible and whether or not the conduct is criminal across the board, Biden said. But as I said yesterday, I'm not going to tell the Justice Department who they should prosecute and who they should not. There will be a thorough investigation of who is responsible and whether or not their responsibility is criminal. And if that is the conclusion, the Attorney General will make that judgment. The Obama administration, for which Biden served as vice president, often used fencing barriers in the Department of Homeland Security facilities to house children, migrants. Likewise, Biden hinted at his push to quickly pass an amnesty for the majority of the 11 to 22 million illegal aliens living in the U.S. and revoke a number of executive orders issued by Trump to reform the nation's legal immigration system that admits 1.2 million green card holders every year. I will introduce an immigration bill immediately and have it sent to the appropriate committees to begin movement, Biden said. I will, in fact, countermand executive orders that the president has, in fact, initiated that are contrary to what I think is either his authority and or even if it is his authority, contrary to the interests of the United States on environmental issues and a range of other things. Critics have said Biden is looking to restart a Hunger Games migration policy at the southern border in which border crossers are encouraged to carry out a dangerous and sometimes deadly journey through Central America and Mexico in order to make their way to the U.S. and be freed into the interior of the country while awaiting their asylum and immigration hearings. Biden and his advisors have said they plan to tear down the legal wall that Trump has erected to close loopholes and eliminate fraud for the purpose of reducing illegal immigration. So they're doing a very predatorial thing. They're pretending to be angels of light but they're asking people to go into the hands of dangerous gangs where high amounts of rape occur in order to cross a deadly border area so that they can get would-be marketed political saviors like Biden to hand them free stuff. This is sick. Because what? They want to import more and more people to perpetuate their strong-arm centralized government policies that attack families, that attack nonviolent people, that attack people around the world that don't play ball with their foreign policy interests. And so they're going to promise people free things if they jeopardize children's lives and coming over here so that they can grant them mass amnesty and give them stuff that was paid for by force from other people's money. They present themselves as little messiahs, but in reality, it's a cheap perversion of Christianity because it uses force, and Jesus never uses force. He never advocates force. He never advocates for stealing from somebody to give people free health care if they cross a border with violent gangs, protecting them and carrying them over the border. He never does that. But politicians do. And people like to believe in the fantasy that human beings are God and that they can decide what's right and wrong whenever it fits their power and their need for control. That's the sad reality of this political system we have. But the good news is we don't have to sit by and be passive and just, deal with these things in a reactionary way. We can be proactive in taking care of those who are in our sphere of influence to take care of, taking care of our health, taking care of our education, taking care of getting out of government schools, taking care of getting out of government single-payer nutrition science, and taking care of not sending off our kids to fight in endless wars that have no end and no objective, taking care to not allow our families to be robbed of their dignity, taking care not to go into the nihilistic culture of pleasure, pleasure, pleasure instead of cultivation and respect and decency. All of those things we can take care of in our lives right now. We can take care of our finances by getting out of debt and, if possible, never returning to credit again. Personal credit has no place, no need for it. We can take care of our lives. We can take care of those who are suffering around us, who need inspiration. We can take care of people who need help with getting groceries in their house. Little elderly lady terrified by the pandemic politics and what they see on television. A lot of elderly people are sitting there watching these NBC, ABC, CBS, and they're being scared to death. And maybe they need help in this time. Maybe they need someone to help them get their groceries. There's all kinds of little acts that we can do, and those things are what matters. Those are the things that people will imitate around us. If we stop giving into the fear, if we stop giving into the addiction to use politics and coercion, once we do that, we'll be able to see with clear eyes that we don't have to wait for messiahs to go around and promise poor, desperate people free handouts at the expense of others. We can create solutions that outcompete those phony, garbage-free handouts so that their whole system is rendered obsolete. That's the future. That's where we're going. That is where our destination is. Rendering those old, antiquated, barbaric, fake idols and their ideologies and their systems obsolete by loving our neighbors and creating technology and love in all kinds of new and exciting ways. That's what we're supposed to do. I'm David Gornoski. Email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. Godspeed.